Alexander Sterling dropped $15,000 in a leather trap, expecting to catch a thief. But when a homeless girl named Elena reached for it, she didn't run. She whispered a secret about his past that no one was supposed to know. What happens next isn't just a coincidence, it's a reckoning. You're about to see why the richest man in the city just became the most hunted. The air in Manhattan was thick with the scent of rain and expensive cologne. Alexander Sterling, the who in this game of shadows, was a man who believed that morality was just a luxury for those who could afford it. At 34, he sat atop a financial empire built on the ruins of his competitors, yet his heart was a hollow vault. He was bored of winning, so tonight he decided to play a different kind of game. What was a simple, handcrafted Italian leather wallet. Inside, tucked behind crisp, sequential $100 bills, was a micro GPS tracker and a small, coded memory stick. To the world, it looked like a lost fortune. To Alexander, it was a social experiment designed to prove that every soul had a price tag. He chose the wear with surgical precision, the intersection of Fifth and Main, right outside the revolving glass doors of his own headquarters. It was a place where the light of the skyscrapers met the darkness of the gutter. This was when the midnight fog rolled in, masking his features as he stepped out of his red sedan. He walked with a calculated limp, pretending to be a distracted businessman, and with a flick of his wrist, the wallet tumbled onto the cold, wet pavement. Elena was the how, the variable he hadn't fully accounted for. She sat huddled against a stone pillar, her oversized jacket barely keeping out the chill. She had watched Alexander from the moment his car pulled up. While he saw a homeless girl, she saw a man trying to buy a clean conscience with a dirty trick. As the wallet hit the ground, she didn't lunge for it. She waited. She watched him walk 10 paces away, his back turned, waiting for the sound of a thief's footsteps. The why of the night changed the moment she stood up. Instead of pocketing the cash, she picked up the wallet and began to laugh, a cold, hollow sound that stopped Alexander in his tracks. "You're late, Alexander," she called out, her voice cutting through the wind like a blade. Alexander spun around, his pulse hammering. He had never met this girl, yet she spoke his name with a terrifying familiarity. He walked back toward her, the golden streetlights reflecting in his eyes. "Keep the money and go," he hissed, trying to regain control of his experiment. Elena held the wallet out, but she didn't give it back. She opened it, pulled out the memory stick, and snapped it in half with a single motion. "I don't want your money, and I definitely don't want your files," she whispered, stepping into his personal space. "I want to know why you're wearing my father's ring on your finger." Alexander looked down at the gold band on his right hand, a ring he had claimed from a failed business partner years ago. The girl he thought was a beggar was actually the daughter of the man he had destroyed to become a billionaire. The trap hadn't caught a thief, it had caught a witness. "Your father chose to lose," Alexander retorted, though his voice lacked its usual steel. "My father chose to trust," Elena countered, her eyes burning with a fire that no rain could douse. "And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what happens when you drop your guard in a city built on bones." As she spoke, the red sedan behind Alexander suddenly roared to life, but his driver wasn't behind the wheel. The game had officially flipped. The billionaire was no longer the one setting the trap. He was the one standing in the middle of it. Alexander Sterling stood frozen as the engine of his own Maybach roared like a caged beast behind him. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the polished facade of the billionaire who thought he was in control. Elena's words hung in the air, sharper than any business contract he had ever signed. "Why are you wearing my father's ring?" she had asked. To Alexander, that ring was a trophy, a symbol of a hostile takeover from 10 years ago. To the girl standing in tattered jeans and a dirt-smudged shirt, it was a piece of her soul. "I don't know who your father was," Alexander lied, his voice trembling slightly. I bought this at an auction. Elena took a step closer, the golden light of the street lamp highlighting the raw intensity in her eyes. My father was Thomas Miller. You didn't buy that ring at an auction, Alexander. You took it from his desk the day you forced him into bankruptcy. The day he lost everything, including the will to live. The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander looked at his hand. He remembered that day. Thomas Miller had been a brilliant engineer, a man who built a renewable energy startup that threatened Sterling's oil interests. Alexander hadn't just bought the company, he had dismantled it, piece by piece, until Thomas was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a broken heart. What do you want? Alexander hissed, reaching for his phone. Money, you have the wallet, take the 15,000 and vanish. You still don't get it, Elena whispered, her face inches from his. I didn't pick up that wallet because I'm hungry. I picked it up because I needed you to stop walking. I needed you to look at me. Because while you were busy playing Billionaire drops a wallet, my friends were busy in your server room. Alexander's heart skipped a beat. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen was flashing red. Security breach, mainframe compromised. He looked at the red sedan behind him. The driver's side door opened, but it wasn't his loyal driver, Marcus. It was a young man in a hoodie holding a tablet. We have the encryption keys, Elena, the man shouted over the rain. Alexander felt the world tilting. He was a man of logic, of numbers, of calculated risks. He had walked into this alley to prove a point about human greed, but he had accidentally walked into a meticulously planned ambush. Elena wasn't just a homeless girl. She was the face of a ghost he had tried to bury. How? Alexander asked, his voice barely audible. How did you know I would be here tonight? Elena smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had waited a decade for justice. Because I know your patterns, Alexander. Every year on the anniversary of my father's death, you feel a tiny, microscopic speck of guilt. You come to this part of town, you walk these streets, and you pretend to be a man of the people. You drop money to see if anyone is good enough to return it, hoping that if someone is, maybe there's hope for you too. She stepped back, the rain drenching her hair. But tonight, the game ends. That memory stick I just broke, it didn't just have your files. It had a virus that triggered the moment you stepped out of your car. Right now, Sterling Global is bleeding. Every cent you took from the small families, every company you gutted, the money is being rerouted. Alexander lunged for her, but the man from the car stepped forward, blocking his path. Alexander looked around. The street that had been empty moments ago was now filled with shadows. People were emerging from the alleyways, not just homeless people, but former employees of the companies Alexander had destroyed. They stood in the rain, silent and watching. You think you can destroy me? Alexander screamed, his ego flaring up. I have lawyers, I have the government in my pocket. You had them, Elena corrected. But when the sun rises, the world will see the billionaire philanthropist for what he really is, a thief who hides behind a suit. Suddenly, the headlights of the Maybach flickered and died. The city block went dark. The only light came from the small jar Elena had been holding earlier, a flickering flame in a glass jar. You dropped your wallet on purpose, Alexander, Elena said, her voice fatting as she began to walk into the darkness. But you never expected that the girl you were trying to test was the one who had already graded you, and you failed. Alexander stood alone in the dark, the leather wallet lying forgotten in the puddle at his feet. His phone was dead. His car was gone. For the first time in his life, Alexander Sterling was just another man in the rain, with no name and no power. But as he looked down, he saw something else Elena had left behind. It was a small, handwritten note tucked into the side of the wallet he had tried to bait her with. He picked it up and read the words by the light of a distant siren. "Check your daughter's medical file. The cure isn't in your labs. It was in my father's." Alexander's breath hitched. His daughter, Chloe, had been sick for years with a rare condition that even his billions couldn't solve. He had spent a fortune trying to find a treatment, never realizing that the man he had ruined years ago had already held the answer. The trap wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about a secret that could save the only thing Alexander actually cared about, if he was brave enough to follow the girl into the shadows. Alexander Sterling stood paralyzed in the drenching rain, the note in his hand shaking as if it held the weight of his entire collapsed empire. The words, "The cure was in my father's labs," echoed in his mind, louder than the thunder rolling over the Manhattan skyline. For years, he had watched his daughter, Chloe, wither away in a sterile hospital wing, surrounded by the world's most expensive machines and most famous doctors. He had assumed that money could eventually force a miracle. He never realized he had crushed that miracle under his own heel 10 years ago. The black Maybach was gone. His security detail was silent. For the first time, the billionaire was truly alone on the very streets he thought he owned. He looked down at the mud-stained leather wallet at his feet, the same bait he had used to try and trap a homeless girl. Now, it was just a piece of dead skin. He shoved the note into his pocket and began to run in the direction Elena had vanished. He ran past the shimmering glass towers of the financial district, his $5,000 suit soaking through and clinging to his frame like a shroud. He felt the eyes of the city on him. The people he usually ignored were now watching him with a strange, knowing silence. He reached the entrance of an abandoned subway station, a place where the air smelled of rust and forgotten dreams. A flickering neon sign above the stairs hummed with a dying light. "Elena," he shouted into the dark abyss of the staircase. "Elena, wait, tell me about the cure. Take everything I have, just save my daughter." His voice bounced off the cracked tiles, but there was no answer. He descended into the shadows, his leather shoes slipping on the damp steps. At the bottom of the stairs, the world changed. This wasn't the New York of postcards and penthouse suites. This was the underground, a sprawling network of tunnels where those displaced by Sterling, urban renewal projects had built a society of their own. Small campfires burned in rusted barrels, casting long, dancing shadows against the graffiti-covered walls. Alexander walked through the encampment. A predator suddenly turned into prey. People stood up as he passed. Some recognized him from the news. Others simply saw a man in a suit who didn't belong in the dark. "You're a long way from Park Avenue, Sterling," a gravelly voice called out. An old man with a missing eye sat on a crate, sharpening a piece of scrap metal. "Looking for the girl? She said you'd come. Said your curiosity would finally get the better of your greed." "Where is she?" Alexander demanded, trying to maintain his authoritative tone, though his voice cracked. The old man pointed deeper into the tunnel, toward a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged to an old fallout shelter. "She's in the archives, but be warned, billionaire, the truth in there isn't free. It costs more than that wallet you dropped on the street." Alexander pushed through the steel door. Inside, the air was dry and smelled of old paper and ozone. To his shock, the room was filled with servers, flickering monitors, and rows upon rows of filing cabinets. This was the nerve center of Elena's operation, the place where she had spent a decade documenting Alexander's crimes. Elena was standing at a central table, her back to him. She had traded her tattered jacket for a clean, dark hoodie. She was looking at a digital blueprint projected onto the wall. "My father didn't just build energy systems, Alexander," she said without turning around. "He was working on cellular regeneration. He was close to a breakthrough for the exact genetic mutation your daughter has. When you liquidated his company, you didn't just take his money. You deleted the research data because it didn't show a high enough profit margin in your quarterly reports. Alexander felt a sick sensation in his stomach. He remembered the file, Project Phoenix. He had labeled it economically non-viable and ordered the servers wiped. I didn't know about Chloe back then. That's the point. Elena spun around, her eyes flashing with a cold, righteous anger. You only care about the tragedy when it hits your front door. For 10 years, I've lived in these tunnels, piecing together the data you tried to burn. I have the formula. I have the sequence that can save her life. Alexander took a step forward, his hands outstretched. Give it to me. Name your price, $1 billion, $2. I'll transfer it right now. Elena laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. You still think you're in a boardroom. Look at your phone, Alexander. He pulled it out. The screen finally flickered to life, but his bank balance didn't show billions. It showed 0. Below it, a ticker was running, a list of thousands of names. His former employees, the small business owners he had crushed, the families evicted from his buildings. His fortune was being distributed in real time to everyone he had ever wronged. You are bankrupt, Elena said calmly. You are effectively a homeless man now, just like you thought I was. You have no power, no influence, and no friends left in high places. Alexander collapsed onto a nearby chair, his head in his hands. The weight of his life's work had vanished in an hour. He looked up at her, tears finally breaking through his stoic mask. Fine, I'm a beggar, I'm nothing, but please, if you have a shred of the humanity you say I lack, save my daughter. Kill me if you want, but give her the cure. Elena walked over to him, looking down at the man who had once been the king of the city. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, glowing vial of blue liquid. The cure. I'm not going to kill you, Alexander. That would be too easy, she whispered. I'm going to give you the cure, but there's a catch. You will never see your daughter again. You will sign over your parental rights to your sister, and you will live out the rest of your days in these tunnels, working for the people you tried to erase. You will become invisible, just like we were. Alexander looked at the vial, then at the girl he had tried to trap with a wallet. He realized the trap was never about the money. It was about redemption. He had to lose his world to save his heart. He reached for the vial. I accept. But just as his fingers touched the glass, the steel door burst open. A group of men in tactical gear, carrying suppressed rifles, flooded the room. The logo on their vests was one Alexander knew well: Sterling Security, Black Ops Division. Mr. Sterling, get away from her, the lead agent shouted. We've tracked your location. We're here to terminate the threat. Alexander looked at the agents, then at Elena, who stood her ground, clutching the cure. He realized his own security team, men he had paid to be ruthless, didn't care about the cure. They were there to protect the asset by eliminating the person who had hacked his bank. The game had just turned into a war zone. The air in the underground bunker shattered as the tactical team from Sterling Security breached the entrance. The red laser sights from their rifles danced across the graffiti-covered walls like hungry ghosts. Alexander Sterling, the man who had once signed the paychecks for these very mercenaries, now found himself on the wrong side of their barrels. Stand down, Alexander roared, his voice bouncing off the concrete. I am your employer. I am the CEO of this company. The lead agent, a man with a cold, scarred face named Captain Vance, didn't lower his weapon. He took a step forward, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass. Not anymore, sir. The board of directors activated the succession contingency 10 minutes ago. Since your accounts were drained and your reputation is currently being dismantled on every news channel in the world, you've been declared a liability. Our orders are to secure the stolen data and eliminate any hostile witnesses. That includes the girl, and you, if you get in the way. Alexander felt a cold dread wash over him. He had built a system so ruthless that it had finally turned its teeth on its own creator. He looked at Elena. She wasn't cowering. She was holding the blue vial, the cure for his daughter, against her chest, her eyes scanning the room for an exit. "Vance, she has the cure for Chloe," Alexander pleaded. "If you open fire, you destroy the only hope for my daughter." "My orders are about assets, not family," Vance replied coldly. "Fire!" The room exploded into chaos. The suppressed rifles coughed in rapid succession, spitting lead into the server racks. Sparking wires and shards of plastic filled the air. In that split second, Alexander didn't think. He acted. He lunged at Elena, tackle-wrapping her and rolling behind a heavy industrial filing cabinet just as a burst of bullets shredded the chair he had been sitting on moments before. "Give me the vial," Alexander hissed over the sound of gunfire. "No, you'll hand it over to them to buy your life back," Elena screamed back, her face pale but determined. "I'm not trying to buy my life." Alexander grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look into his eyes. "I'm trying to save hers. There's an old service elevator behind the cooling unit. It's not on the public blueprints. I built it for a private exit years ago when I first scouted this area for development. If we can get there, we can get out." Elena looked at him, searching for a trace of the billionaire she hated. For the first time, she saw only a father. She nodded slowly. Alexander grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall. "On 3, run for the cooling unit. Don't look back." 1, 2, 3. Alexander swung the extinguisher, smashing a steam pipe running along the ceiling. A cloud of scalding white vapor hissed into the room, blinding the thermal optics of the tactical team. Under the cover of the steam, they scrambled toward the back of the room. Vance's men fired blindly into the mist, the bullets clanging off metal pipes. They reached the hidden elevator, a rusted, cage-style lift hidden behind a false wall of lockers. Alexander punched in a code he hadn't used in a decade. The doors groaned open. They dived inside, the elevator jolting as it began its slow, agonizing ascent. As the lift rose, the sounds of the struggle below faded, replaced by the rhythmic clanking of the chains. They were trapped in a small metal box, two enemies forced together by a shared threat. "Why did you do it?" Elena asked softly, leaning against the cage. "You could have stayed behind. You could have told them you were their hostage. They might have let you live." Alexander looked at the gold ring on his finger, the ring that belonged to her father. He slowly twisted it off and held it out to her. "I've spent my whole life protecting assets. I forgot that the most valuable things in life aren't assets. They're people. Your father knew that. My daughter knows that. I'm just a slow learner." Elena took the ring, her fingers brushing his. The hatred in her eyes was beginning to thaw, replaced by something more complex, pity. "The elevator is going to the sub-basement of Sterling Tower," Alexander explained, his mind racing through the tactical situation. "Vance will expect us to flee into the street, but we're going to do the opposite. We're going to the top floor, my private lab. If we can get the sequence into the main medical computer, it will broadcast the formula to every hospital in the world. They won't be able to hide it then." "But that's where the rest of your security is," Elena pointed out. "It's a suicide mission." "It's not a suicide mission," Alexander said, a grim smile appearing on his face. "It's a hostile takeover, but this time I'm the one taking over my own company." The elevator dinged. The doors opened into the sleek, dark marble hallway of the Sterling Tower sub-basement. But they weren't alone. Standing there was Marcus, Alexander's driver, but he wasn't holding a steering wheel. He was holding a handgun, and his face was a mask of regret. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Marcus whispered. "The board, they have my family. They told me if I didn't stop you here, I'd never see them again." Alexander stood in front of Elena, shielding her. Marcus, look at me. You've been with me for 12 years. You know what I was. But look at what I am now. I have nothing. No money, no power, just a chance to save a child. Marcus's hand trembled. The tension was unbearable. Down the hallway, the sound of heavy footsteps and shouting indicated that Vance's team was closing in from the stairwell. The wallet, Elena whispered from behind Alexander. What? Alexander asked. The wallet you dropped, she said, her voice growing stronger. It had a master keycard hidden in the lining. You used it for emergencies. Do you still have it? Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out the mud-caked leather wallet. He had forgotten it was there. He ripped open the secret compartment. The gold-plated card shimmered under the hallway lights. He looked at Marcus. Marcus, you have a choice. You can be the man who follows orders, or you can be the man who does what's right. Help us get to the roof, and I promise you, I will use every last secret I have to protect your family. Marcus looked at the gun, then at the man he had served for over a decade. He slowly lowered the weapon and stepped aside, pointing toward a service staircase. The main elevators are locked down. Take the stairs to the 80th floor. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Alexander didn't waste a second. He grabbed Elena's hand, and they began the grueling climb. Every flight of stairs was a battle against exhaustion. By the 50th floor, Alexander's lungs felt like they were on fire. By the 70th, he could hear the sirens of the entire city converging on the building below. They reached the final door, the lab. Alexander swiped the gold card. The door hissed open to reveal a room of pure white glass and steel. In the center was a holographic display of a human DNA strand. Hurry, Alexander shouted, pointing to the console. Elena ran to the computer, plugging in the data from the vial. The screen lit up. Synthesizing cure, 10%, 20%. But as the progress bar crawled forward, the glass wall of the lab shattered. A flashbang grenade bounced across the floor, blinding them with a white-hot light. Through the ringing in his ears, Alexander saw Captain Vance stepping through the broken glass, his rifle aimed directly at the computer terminal. End of the line, Alexander, Vance said, his finger tightening on the trigger. The board sends their regards. The high-tech lab was filled with the deafening hum of servers and the blinding glare of red emergency lights. Captain Vance stood amidst the shattered glass of the balcony, his rifle leveled at the main console. The progress bar on the screen flickered. Uploading cure, 65%. Step away from the terminal, Elena, Vance commanded, his voice cold and robotic. I don't want to damage the hardware, but I will put a bullet through your heart if you don't move. Alexander Sterling, bruised and bleeding, looked from the barrel of the gun to the screen. He saw his daughter's name, Chloe, flashing in the corner of the medical file. For the first time in his life, he didn't calculate the cost in dollars. He calculated it in heartbeats. Vance, look at the screen, Alexander shouted, stepping between the rifle and Elena. That's not just data, that's a child's life, my child's life. You've worked for me for 5 years. You've seen her in that hospital wing. Have you lost all your humanity? Humanity is for people who can afford it, sir, Vance replied. The board offered me a seat on the executive committee for this. I'm taking it. Vance shifted his aim. He wasn't going for Elena anymore. He was going for the power core of the computer. If that was destroyed, the sequence would be lost forever. No, Alexander screamed. He didn't have a weapon, he didn't have a plan. He only had his body. As Vance pulled the trigger, Alexander lunged. He didn't tackle the gunman. He tackled the console, shielding the delicate processors with his own torso. The room erupted with the thud-thud-thud of suppressed fire. Alexander felt the impact, 3 sharp, burning stings in his back, but he didn't let go. He gripped the metal frame of the server, his blood dripping onto the cooling fans. "Alexander!" Elena shrieked, her hands flying to the keyboard. "Uploading, 85%, 90%. Vance cursed, reloading his weapon. "You fool, you died for a ghost." Vance stepped forward to finish the job, but suddenly the lab doors hissed open again. Marcus, the driver, stumbled in, clutching his side where he had been wounded earlier. He wasn't alone. Behind him were dozens of Sterling Tower employees, the janitors, the junior analysts, the people Alexander had never bothered to learn the names of. They were armed with whatever they could find: fire axes, metal pipes, and heavy office equipment. "Drop the weapon, Vance!" Marcus yelled, his voice strained. "The whole building knows now. Elena's hack didn't just drain the banks, it broadcast the security footage of what you're doing here to every screen in the city." Vance looked up at the wall monitors. He saw himself, frozen in high definition, aiming a rifle at a bleeding Alexander Sterling. Outside the windows, the streets of Manhattan were filled with thousands of people who had been watching the drama unfold on the giant digital billboards of Times Square. The billionaire who had dropped a wallet to test a girl had accidentally started a revolution. Vance realized he was trapped. He dropped his rifle and threw his hands up as Marcus, and the others swarmed him. Elena ignored the chaos. She knelt beside Alexander, who was slumped against the server rack. The screen behind him turned a bright, triumphant green, upload complete, broadcasting worldwide. "You did it," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The cure is out, it's free, no one can ever own it again." Alexander coughed, a thin trail of blood escaping his lips. He looked at the gold ring Elena was still clutching, the ring of the man he had destroyed. Is Chloe going to be okay?" "The hospital just received the protocol." Elena checked her tablet, her fingers shaking. "They're starting the treatment. Alexander, she's going to live." A weak, genuine smile touched Alexander's face. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had finally found what he was looking for when he dropped that wallet in the rain. He had found his soul. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut, "for everything." "Don't close your eyes, Alexander. Stay with me." Elena grabbed his hand, the same hand that had let the wallet fall on purpose. The sound of sirens grew louder as medical teams and police finally breached the 80th floor. But as they rushed in, the lights in the building flickered. The digital billboards outside went black for a second, then reappeared with a new image. It wasn't the security footage anymore. It was a countdown. Elena looked at the screen in horror. "The board! They've initiated a scorched earth protocol. They're deleting the entire Sterling database, including the medical records of everyone currently in the Sterling hospitals." The battle wasn't over. To save his daughter and thousands of others, Alexander's life wasn't the only thing that needed to be sacrificed. The entire Sterling Tower, the very symbol of his greed, had to be brought down. The green "upload complete" light on the console was a small victory in a room that was rapidly becoming a tomb. Alexander lay slumped against the vibrating server racks, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Elena's hands were a blur across the glass keyboard, her face illuminated by the flickering red of the emergency override. "They're not just deleting files, Alexander," Elena shouted over the rising whine of the cooling fans. "The board has activated a scorched earth script. It's a self-destruct for the entire Sterling cloud network. If it finishes, every medical record, every patient history, and every ventilator synchronization in Sterling-owned hospitals will be wiped. Thousands of people, not just Chloe, will die in the next 5 minutes." The who in this nightmare had shifted. It was no longer just about Alexander and Elena. It was about the cold, faceless board of directors who would rather kill thousands than face a courtroom. Alexander forced his eyes open. The pain in his chest was a dull roar, but the sight of the countdown, 04:52, gave him a surge of adrenaline. He reached up, his hand trembling, and grabbed the edge of the console. The kill switch, Alexander whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. I can't reach it, Elena cried out, her screen filled with access denied pop-ups. They've locked the terminal from an external site. I need a physical biometric override from the CEO's private vault, but that's on the basement level. Where was the problem? They were on the 80th floor, and the building's elevators were dead. The staircase was crawling with Vance's remaining tactical units. Not the basement, Alexander wheezed, pointing to the ceiling. The antenna. The Sterling Tower isn't just an office. It's a hub. Every bit of data for the city passes through the satellite array on the roof. If you can't stop the delete command, you have to air-gap the building. Elena understood instantly. If they severed the building's physical connection to the satellite, the board's delete signal couldn't reach the servers. But to do that, someone had to manually disconnect the fiber optic trunks on the rooftop, in the middle of a storm 80 stories above the ground. Marcus, Alexander yelled, his voice surprisingly strong. Marcus, who had been guarding the door with a fire axe, ran over. I'm here, sir. Take Elena to the roof. There's a maintenance hatch in my office. Use the gold keycard to open the manual override. Alexander shoved the mud-stained wallet into Marcus's hand. The wallet that had been a prop for a cruel game was now the only key to saving the city. What about you? Elena asked, grabbing her tablet. I'll stay here, Alexander said, a grim smile on his face. I'm going to use the internal intercom to distract Vance's men. I'm the only one who knows the security codes to lock them in the stairwells. Go, now. Elena looked at the man she had hated for a decade. She saw the blood on his suit, the suit that used to represent everything wrong with the world. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Don't you dare die before I come back for that ring. Marcus grabbed Elena, and they disappeared through the office door. Alexander dragged himself toward the CEO's chair. Every inch felt like a mile. He sat in the leather throne, the same chair where he had signed the orders to destroy Elena's father. He pulled the microphone toward him. Attention all Sterling security units. Alexander's voice echoed through every floor of the tower. This is Alexander Sterling. The board has betrayed you. The Scorched Earth Protocol includes cleanup teams sent to eliminate all security personnel on site to ensure no witnesses remain. If you want to live, drop your weapons and head to the north exit immediately. It was what a brilliant lie. Alexander knew there were no cleanup teams, but he knew how mercenaries thought. He watched on the grainy security monitors as Vance's men hesitated, then broke rank, sprinting away from the 80th floor in a panic. Meanwhile, on the roof, the howl was becoming a nightmare. The wind was screaming at 80 miles per hour. Elena and Marcus crawled across the slick metal surface toward the massive satellite dish. Below them, the lights of New York looked like a distant galaxy. There, Elena pointed to a heavy metal junction box. The fiber trunks are in there. Marcus used his axe to pry the box open. Inside were hundreds of glowing glass cables. Which one? Marcus yelled over the wind. All of them, Elena screamed back. As they began to hack away at the cables, the countdown on Elena's tablet hit 01:15. Back in the lab, Alexander's vision was blurring. He saw a shadow in the doorway. It wasn't Marcus. It was Captain Vance, bloodied and furious, holding a backup pistol. You lied to my men, Alexander, Vance growled, his arm shaking. But I know you. I know there are no cleanup teams. I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to the roof to finish that girl." Alexander didn't flinch. He looked at the countdown, 00:45. "You're too late, Vance," Alexander said softly. "The billionaire you worked for is already dead. You're just talking to a father now." Vance leveled the gun at Alexander's head. Suddenly, the entire building groaned. On the roof, Marcus had severed the final trunk. The digital connection to the world snapped. In the lab, every screen went black. The delete command, only seconds away from execution, vanished into the void. The scorched earth protocol had failed. Vance screamed in rage and pulled the trigger. But in that same moment, a flash of blue light erupted from the server racks. The air gapping had caused a massive electrical surge through the internal systems. The console Alexander was leaning against exploded in a shower of sparks, throwing him and Vance across the room. The lab began to fill with thick, black smoke. The sprinklers triggered, drenching everything in ice-cold water. Alexander lay on the floor, the water washing the blood from his face. He could hear the sound of a helicopter approaching the roof. Elena and Marcus were safe. Chloe was safe. The city was safe. As the darkness finally closed in on him, Alexander felt a strange sensation in his pocket. He reached in and pulled out the small, crumpled photograph he had taken from Elena earlier, the picture of the little girl, Lily. He realized then that the why of his entire life had been wrong. He had spent years building walls, only to realize that the only thing worth doing was building bridges. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the light of the morning sun breaking through the smoke-filled windows. The night of the billionaire's wallet was over. But the sirens weren't for a billionaire anymore. They were for a hero. The morning sun over Manhattan didn't bring the usual golden warmth. It brought a cold, harsh clarity. As the smoke cleared from the 80th floor of Sterling Tower, the who of the story had become a global enigma. Alexander Sterling, the man who once controlled the flow of billions, was being carried out on a stretcher, draped in an oxygen mask and a tattered, blood-soaked suit. He was no longer the hunter. He was a broken man, a fugitive, and to many, a sudden and confusing savior. The wear of the conflict had shifted from the dark alleyways to the bright, unforgiving screens of the world's newsrooms. In every coffee shop from London to Tokyo, the footage of the billionaire's wallet trap was playing on a loop. But it wasn't the version the board of directors wanted. Elena had successfully leaked the raw, unedited truth. The world saw Alexander drop the wallet, but they also saw him take 3 bullets to save a medical database. Elena stood on the edge of the rooftop, watching the medevac helicopter lift Alexander away. In her hand, she clutched the gold ring, the only thing she had left of her father's legacy. Marcus stood beside her, his face bruised and weary. "The police are downstairs, Elena," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "The board is already spinning the story. They're calling Alexander a mentally unstable CEO who went on a rampage. They're blaming the data leak on a cyber-terrorist attack. They're making you the villain." The what of this part of the journey was the battle for the narrative. Truth was a fragile thing in a world owned by corporations. The board had already frozen every asset Alexander had, but they hadn't realized that Elena had already moved the most important currency, the evidence of their crimes. "Let them talk," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the receding helicopter. "The files I broadcasted didn't just contain the cure. They contained the transcripts of the board's scorched earth meeting. They recorded themselves ordering the death of thousands to protect their stock prices. By noon today, the board won't be in a boardroom, they'll be in a precinct." But the how of the situation was far more dangerous than she realized. As they descended the service stairs, the building was swarming not just with police, but with cleaners. private contractors hired by the board's silent partners. These weren't soldiers like Vance. These were professionals who worked in the shadows of the law. When they reached the lobby, the air was thick with tension. A sea of reporters and protesters had surrounded the building. People were holding signs that read, "Where is the cure?" And the wallet was a lie. Elena saw a familiar face in the crowd, a woman in a white lab coat, weeping as she spoke to a camera. It was the head of the hospital where Chloe, Alexander's daughter, was being treated. "The treatment is working," the doctor cried. "The sequence Elena leaked. It's a miracle. But the men in suits are trying to stop us. They're claiming the data is proprietary and that we're using it illegally." The why of the story had reached its peak. The conflict was no longer about a wallet. It was about the fundamental right to live versus the right to profit. Elena pushed through the lobby doors, the flashbulbs of cameras exploding around her like 100 tiny suns. She didn't hide her face. She held her father's ring high above her head. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice amplified by the hundreds of microphones thrust toward her. Alexander Sterling dropped a wallet to see if a homeless girl was honest, but in the process, he found out that the people he worked with were the real thieves. He is in that hospital right now because he chose his daughter over his empire. Suddenly, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the crowd. A man in a high-end suit, the chairman of the board, stepped out. He looked at Elena with a patronizing smile. "A touching story, young lady," the chairman said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "But Mr. Sterling is being charged with industrial espionage and attempted murder. As for your cure, it belongs to Sterling Global. Every hospital using it without our license will be sued into non-existence. Now give me the ring. It's corporate property." The crowd hissed, but the chairman had the law and the money on his side. Or so he thought. Elena pulled out a small tablet. "You forgot one thing, Mr. Chairman. When Alexander gave me the master key card, he didn't just give me access to the building. He gave me access to his dead man's switch." The moment his heart rate dropped below a certain level in the ambulance, a secondary file was released to every major law firm in the country. The chairman's smile faltered. "That file contains the buyback records," Elena continued, stepping closer to him. "It proves you used the company's pension fund to pay for the scorched earth contractors. You didn't just steal from the sick, you stole from your own employees." The reaction was instantaneous. The security guards standing behind the chairman looked at each other, then at their boss. The very people paid to protect him were now the ones who had been robbed by him. In that moment, the power shifted. It wasn't about billions anymore. It was about the truth that can only be found when someone has nothing left to lose. As the police stepped forward to arrest the chairman, Elena turned away. She had a more important place to be. She and Marcus took a taxi to the hospital, not the private wing where Alexander would have gone, but the public ward where Chloe was. When she arrived, she found Alexander in a guarded room. He was awake, but his face was pale. Chloe was sitting by his bed, her small hand in his. The girl who was supposed to have 10 days left was now breathing without a ventilator. Alexander looked at Elena. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no billionaire left in him. He looked like a man who had finally come home from a very long, dark journey. "You did it," Alexander whispered. "We did it," Elena corrected. She walked to the bed and placed the gold ring on the table. "You don't need this anymore. You have something better." Alexander looked at his daughter, then at the girl who had changed his life. "What happens now? I'm going to prison, aren't I?" "Probably," Elena said softly. "But for the first time in your life, you'll be able to sleep with a clear conscience. And when you come out, there will be people waiting for you. People who remember the man who dropped a wallet but became a hero." The when of the story was closing. The sun was fully up now. The billionaire was bankrupt, the homeless girl was a leader, and the city was awake. But as Elena left the hospital room, she noticed a man in a gray suit sitting in the waiting area. He wasn't a reporter. He wasn't a cop. He was holding a leather wallet, the exact same design as Alexander's. He looked at Elena and nodded. The experiment isn't over, Elena. Alexander was just the first. There are 12 of us on the board of the World Council, and we want to see if the rest of you are as honest as you claim. Elena realized then that the trap wasn't just for Alexander. It was a test for the entire world. The air in the hospital waiting room turned cold as Elena stared at the man in the gray suit. The leather wallet in his hand was an exact replica of the one Alexander had dropped, a symbol of a global elite that viewed the world's population as laboratory mice. The WHO was no longer just a corrupt board. It was the World Council, a shadow group of 12 individuals who controlled the world's resources through psychological tests and engineered crises. You think this was about one man's greed? The man in the gray suit asked, his voice a calm, terrifying monotone. Alexander was our most successful experiment. He proved that even the most ruthless predator could be broken by a single act of honesty from someone he deemed insignificant. We wanted to see if integrity was a glitch in the human system. It turns out it's a contagion. Elena gripped the handle of her bag, her heart hammering against her ribs. The where was no longer the Sterling Tower. It was every corner of the globe where the World Council held sway. Alexander isn't a glitch, she spat. He's a man who realized that your games have a human cost, and now that the cure is out, you can't control us anymore. The man stood up, his movements fluid and predatory. The cure is just data, Elena. Data can be overwritten, but the legend of Alexander Sterling, that is what we are here to erase. If the world sees him as a hero, they will stop fearing us, and fear is the only thing that keeps the gears of the world turning. The what of this final chapter was the ultimate battle for the soul of the people. While Alexander lay in his hospital bed, guarded by the very people he once looked down upon, the World Council was preparing to shut down the city's power grid, blaming it on Elena's hack. They wanted to create a night of chaos that would make the public beg for their return to order. Elena knew she had only one move left. She didn't have billions, and she didn't have a tactical team. She had the how, the truth. She ran back into Alexander's room. He was awake, his hand still gripped by a sleeping Chloe. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice urgent. "They're here, the council. They're going to black out the city. They're going to blame us for the deaths in the hospitals." Alexander's eyes, once cold and calculating, were now filled with a weary wisdom. He looked at the medical monitors keeping his daughter alive. "The basement," he wheezed. "Sterling Tower wasn't just a hub for data. It was built on an old Tesla coil grid. My father, he was obsessed with free energy. I buried his research because it wasn't profitable, but the hardware is still there. If you can jumpstart the grid from the basement, the council can't cut the power. The city will stay lit, and their lie will die in the light." "But I can't get back into the tower," Elena said. "It's a crime scene. It's surrounded by the council's cleaners." Alexander reached into the side of his hospital gown and pulled out something he had hidden. It was a small, silver thumb drive. "This is the master override for the Tesla grid. I kept it as a last resort in case I ever needed to hold the city hostage. Now I'm giving it to you to set it free." The when was now. The clock was ticking toward the midnight deadline the council had set for the blackout. Elena and Marcus navigated the city like shadows. The billionaire's wallet had become a symbol of the revolution. Everywhere they went, they saw people holding up their own wallets as a sign of protest. The homeless, the working class, and the former Sterling employees had formed a human shield around the tower. They weren't fighting with guns, They were fighting with presence. As the council's black-clad cleaners tried to move the crowd, the people simply sat down. They refused to move. The image was being broadcasted to billions. The wallet girl and the fallen billionaire had turned a psychological experiment into a global awakening. Elena reached the basement of the tower through the sewer tunnels she knew so well. In the damp, dark belly of the skyscraper, she found the massive, copper-coiled machines Alexander's father had built. They were dusty, forgotten relics of a better future. She plugged in the silver drive. The machines began to hum, a low, vibrating thrum that shook the very foundations of the building. "System initializing," a voice echoed through the basement. "Project Prometheus online." Above ground, the World Council gave the order to cut the main power. Across Manhattan, the lights flickered and died. For 5 seconds, the city was plunged into a terrifying, absolute darkness. The man in the gray suit stood on a balcony, watching with a satisfied smile. But then a blue pulse of light erupted from the base of the Sterling Tower. It shot up the side of the building like a bolt of lightning, hitting the antenna Elena and Marcus had hacked earlier. From the antenna, the pulse spread outward, jumping from building to building, street lamp to street lamp. The city didn't just regain power, it glowed with a brilliant, clean blue light. The why was finally clear. This wasn't about money or power. It was about the light that comes when you stop trying to own the world and start trying to serve it. The blackout had failed. The council's lie was exposed in the most spectacular way possible. The man in the gray suit looked at his phone. It was ringing. Every member of the council was being contacted by the international authorities. The data Elena had leaked earlier was being backed up by the very energy grid she had just activated. The council's untraceable accounts were now being tracked by the Blue Pulse network. Back at the hospital, the sun began to rise on a new world. Alexander Sterling sat by the window, watching the blue light fade as the morning sun took over. He knew he was going to prison. He knew he would never be a billionaire again. But as Chloe woke up and smiled at him, her health fully restored by the cure Elena had fought for, he realized he was the richest man he had ever known. Elena entered the room one last time. She was no longer wearing the tattered jacket. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out as gold. She placed the leather wallet, the original one, on Alexander's lap. "The police are here for you, Alexander," she said softly. "I'm ready," he replied. He looked at the wallet. "You know, when I dropped this, I thought I was the one testing the world. I didn't realize the world was testing me." "And did you pass?" Elena asked. Alexander looked at his daughter, then at the city he had helped save. "I think, for the first time in my life, I'm finally honest." As the officers led Alexander away in handcuffs, he didn't lower his head. He looked at the cameras, at the millions of people watching. He didn't offer a corporate apology. He simply nodded to Elena. The story of the billionaire and the homeless girl ended where it began, with a choice. A choice to be more than a bank account. A choice to see the unexpected in the people we ignore. We are all carrying wallets full of something. For some, it's money. For others, it's secrets. But for those who truly change the world, it's the courage to drop the act and pick up the truth. Alexander and Elena's journey proves that true wealth isn't found in a bank account, but in the courage to do what's right when the whole world is watching. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. But I want to hear from you. Do you think Alexander deserved a second chance after everything he did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more powerful stories that challenge your perspective, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, your integrity is the only thing money can't buy. See you in the next one.